the glacier integration story. I want to tell you this story. And it's interesting to me how history gets documented. If you look up Oak Ridge integration on the internet, you can find some documents that reference it, and most of them are pretty good detail about what happened. The one that I want to read a section to you is from some insights into integration in Oak Ridge. I'm just going to read one paragraph, and then I'm going to read you a story out of written by James Spicer, the Reverend James Spicer. But here, this is the paragraph I'll read first. The Reverend James Spicer, chairman of the Advisory Board on Human Relations, went with McNeese, who was the mayor at the time, to Atlanta to meet with Stanley Davis. Davis was worried about the decision to integrate, what the decision to integrate would do to his cafeterias across the South. Despite this, he agreed to desegregate. Now, that's a little paragraph that you find when you look up that story on the internet. Now, here's the rest of the story. The paragraph in Spicer's book is entitled, "Let's Go See the Davis Brothers." After finding the address of the Davis Brothers Corporation in Atlanta, I called and asked for an appointment for the mayor and myself. After what sounded like some shuffling, the person I was talking with found an appropriate time and we agreed upon it. Mayor Bob and I made travel arrangements, and on the day, jumped on a plane, went to Atlanta, and took a cab to the address we had found. We were somewhat incredulous when we discovered that their offices were in the backside of a warehouse with no sign and nothing pretty. We went in, and it was as bare and unfinished as the outside. We were led to a second room that had 4 chairs and sat down to wait. The Davis brothers did not keep us waiting long. The 2 men, middle-aged and a little heavy, greeted us with a kind of cold suspicion. I started the conversation by telling them who we were and what we wanted. They listened and then started telling us their story. They were both in the Navy during World War II. In fact, they were both Navy cooks, but they were also excellent poker players, and in their off time managed to win money every day. When the war was over, they had collected enough to start their first restaurant. It was designed to look like the officers' mess on the ships they had served on. They served good, solid, down country food, and it was a success from the beginning. They listened politely as we brought the conversation back to the problems in Oak Ridge. Then, almost in tandem, they became aggressive in telling us that they would never integrate their restaurants. When they finished with that meeting, they made it clear that they did not want to discuss it anymore and that we were dismissed. We left. Bob McNeese, the mayor, was a charming man, but he had an Irish temper. He was really upset by the brothers, and for the cab ride back to the airport, he swore, shouted, and suggested a number of alternatives that were both impractical and illegal. We fumed and agreed that we had been treated badly, and what could you expect from a couple of hillbillies that would run a restaurant like that? Our airplane was a DC-3 with a center aisle and 2 seats on each side. Bob quickly took a window seat on the left, and I took one on the right. A young man who looked to be about my age, in his early 30s, well-dressed and pleasant-looking, sat down beside me. We greeted each other, made some small talk, and he asked me where I was going. I told him Oak Ridge, and he seemed very interested. Since I was full and running over with our visit with the Davis brothers, I couldn't help starting to tell him our story and the disaster of our meeting. He did not make any comment, but he seemed extremely interested. He asked me a couple of questions that made me feel he knew something about Oak Ridge. But then we landed. I told him I was glad to meet him, shook his hand, and we departed. Bob was still grumpy and did not cheer up on the way back to Oak Ridge. 2 days later, about 11 o'clock in the morning, I received a call from Gene Joyce, a very well-known attorney in the town. He said that he had some very important information for me, and he wanted me to come right over to his office. His office was virtually across the street from the church where I worked, and it did not take long for me to get there. And as soon as I was settled in his office, Gene told me that representing the Glazier Corporation had information that would be helpful in our task of ending Jim Crow. Mr. Glazier Sr. had been a casual worker in the town of Clinton, 5 miles from Oak Ridge, who had begun to pick up scrap and excess material left from the construction programs as Oak Ridge was being built. His work was most appreciated, and he received contracts to do it. He continued this for 20 years, and along the way became a multimillionaire. He invested his money in the creation of a huge mall that became the downtown for Oak Ridge. All the important stores for the city were placed there, including Davis Brothers Cafeteria. It seems that the young man who sat next to me on the airplane was also named Glazier. It was actually Emerson Glazier, Guilford's son. He was the son of the founder of the corporation and, like his father, an extremely good businessman. When he got home, he talked with his father, and they quickly came up with a plan. Davis Brothers, in addition to leasing their restaurant space, also leased a bowling alley. They made much money with their restaurant, but lost much money with their bowling alley. Their lease for the bowling alley was $8,000 a year, and it had 6 more years to run. The Glazier Corporation had proposed to the Davis Brothers that they would let them out of the lease if they would integrate their restaurant. $48,000 was the price for integration. Davis Brothers immediately accepted. The Davis Brothers were concerned about how the actual occasion of integration would occur. I told Gene we would be back the next day with a plan and the mayor. I called an emergency meeting of the Human Relations Committee, and we devised a plan, and with the help of the mayor, could take action in 1 week. The plan was that we would go to lunch on a regular workday with no announcement, but plenty of security. The African American members of the committee made arrangements for a group from Scarborough to attend along with the Human Relations Committee. The mayor said he would look after security. Gene Joyce sent word to the Davis Brothers and the Glaziers about our plan. I went to talk to the manager of the cafeteria, told him the plan, and he turned red, then white, and began to shake. I did my best to reassure him, but largely to no avail. On the big day, in parentheses, and it was, close parentheses, Roy and I went down to the cafeteria at the appointed hour and found 2 cars of our Scarborough friends waiting. We went over to talk to them, and they were nervous. But we said, folks, just be yourself. Nothing is going to happen. I was pretty sure of that because I was looking over my shoulder at a big parade of single men, all wearing jackets, going into the restaurant. Roy and I led the way to the Scarborough folks behind us, mixed with the committee members. When we got to the beginning of the tray line, the manager was standing there, sweat running down his face, and his clothing wet with sweat. I smiled at him and said, it's going to be fine. And away we went, filling our trays and finding our table. I surveyed the scene and counted about 50 police, some local and some FBI, and some I couldn't identify. As the lunch crowd came in, no one seemed to notice that a change had come. It was a very successful day for human relations. But there was more. With no conversation or urging from us, the Davis brothers decided to immediately integrate all of their restaurants. Moreover, one of the brothers was the president of the Southern Restaurant Association, and they announced that all of the members would integrate their restaurants. Thank you, Mr. Glazier. I hope you enjoyed that story. I know it was a lengthy reading, but I thought it was a pertinent reading that should be shared. The rest of the story about how restaurants in Oak Ridge, the Davis Brothers restaurant, was integrated, which led to the integration of a large number of restaurants in the South.